In the quiet, sterile halls of the maternity ward, where the soft cries of newborns and the hum of hospital machines filled the air, something unusual was happening behind the closed doors of room 309. Nurse Kelly had been working the night shift for over 6 years and had seen just about everything. But tonight, as she moved through the ward, she couldn't shake the feeling that something wasn't right. She'd just finished checking on a new mother, fresh from delivery, when she noticed something strange. The woman, a young mother, seemed distant, almost too pale, her movements stiff as she lay in the bed. Her eyes were bloodshot, and despite the joy of welcoming a newborn, there was a sadness in her gaze, something Kelly had learned to recognize. She knew the signs of someone trying to hide their pain. But this wasn't just any ordinary pain. Kelly felt a cold knot in her stomach as she looked at the woman's arms, barely visible beneath the hospital gown. The bruises were hard to miss. They weren't the kind of bruises you'd expect from childbirth or from any normal hospital procedure. These were different, dark, angry marks, covering the woman's arms like a grim pattern. Kelly knew immediately that something was wrong, and instinctively, her nurse's training kicked in. She wasn't just concerned about the physical injuries. It was the quiet, unsettling way the woman kept looking away when Kelly tried to make eye contact. "Are you okay?" Kelly asked gently, her voice soft, trying not to startle her. The woman nodded quickly, too quickly, as if she was hiding something. She tried to cover her arms with the blanket, but the bruises were too big to ignore. Kelly's heart sank as she noticed the way the woman flinched every time she moved her arm or shifted in the bed. It wasn't just the bruises. There were other signs, small but telling, that made Kelly suspect this wasn't just an accident. As a nurse, Kelly had seen it all. She knew how to tell when a patient was in pain, how to spot the subtle signs of domestic abuse, and how to care for women in distress. But this was different. This was more than just physical injury. This was a cry for help, and Kelly could feel it deep in her gut. She needed to know more. Without making the woman feel pressured, Kelly gently asked, "Can you tell me what happened to your arms?" The woman looked away, her eyes darting nervously to the door. It was as if she was afraid to speak. Kelly could see her lips trembling, and she knew there was more to this story than the woman was letting on. It wasn't uncommon for victims of domestic violence to hide their injuries out of fear, shame, or the hope that no one would notice. But Kelly wasn't going to let this go. "Is there someone I should call?" Kelly asked quietly, her voice firm but kind. The woman looked at her for the first time since Kelly entered the room. For a moment, there was a flicker of something in her eyes, fear, desperation, or maybe a silent plea for help. The woman opened her mouth as if to speak, but before she could say anything, there was a sharp knock on the door. A nurse from another department came in with some paperwork. The woman quickly closed her mouth, and her body stiffened, almost as if she had been caught doing something wrong. Kelly watched her carefully, noting how the woman's posture had changed. She was no longer the vulnerable new mother Kelly had initially seen. Instead, she had retreated into herself, her arms folded protectively against her body, as if she was afraid of being touched. Kelly knew something was terribly wrong. As the other nurse left, Kelly stood by the door for a moment, pretending to write on her clipboard, but her mind was racing. She had to be careful. She couldn't just call for help without understanding the full picture. There had to be a reason why the woman was so scared to speak, why she was hiding her injuries. Kelly took a deep breath, her fingers lightly tapping the pen against the clipboard. She wasn't sure what she could do to help without putting the woman in more danger, but she knew one thing for sure. This wasn't just a case of minor injuries. This was something more. As she glanced back at the woman, Kelly noticed something else. A phone number scrawled hastily on a napkin, half hidden beneath the woman's pillow. It was clear this had been written in a moment of urgency, maybe even panic. Without thinking, Kelly stepped forward and gently pulled back the pillow, her heart pounding in her chest. The number looked familiar, but that wasn't what worried Kelly. What worried her was the way the woman reacted when she saw Kelly holding it. Her eyes widened in terror. Kelly's mind raced. Who had given her this number? Why was it hidden like this? Was it a clue to something deeper? Was there someone she needed to call? Someone who could help her? The more Kelly thought about it, the more she realized that this wasn't just a situation involving a mother recovering from childbirth. This was something much more dangerous, something that could cost the woman her safety, and perhaps even her life. Kelly had only seconds to decide. She couldn't just ignore it. Her gut told her that this was a call for help. As her finger hovered over the phone, ready to dial 911, the woman suddenly spoke. Her voice was barely a whisper, trembling with fear. "Please don't call anyone," she begged, her eyes filled with tears. "He'll know. He'll hurt me." The words sent a chill down Kelly's spine. She had no idea what was going on, but the fear in the woman's voice was enough to make her hesitate. Could she really make the call? Would she be putting the woman in even more danger? Or was this the only chance she had to save her? Kelly stood frozen, the phone still in her hand. The seconds felt like hours. She knew she had to act, but the decision was harder than she could have ever imagined. And in that moment, the door to the room opened once again. The door opened, and Kelly's heart skipped a beat. A man entered the room, tall and imposing, with a hard look on his face that immediately made Kelly's instincts flare. He didn't belong in a maternity ward. His demeanor, the way he moved, it was all wrong for this place. He seemed to be in his mid-30s, his eyes scanning the room coldly as he stepped inside. His gaze flicked over to the woman in the bed, and she visibly tensed, her shoulders pulling back as if she were trying to shrink into herself. "How's she doing?" he asked, his voice low, almost robotic. Kelly didn't miss the way the woman flinched at his words. It was a small, almost imperceptible movement, but it spoke volumes. Kelly kept her expression neutral, her hand still holding the phone, her finger hovering over the call button. She could feel the weight of the decision pressing on her chest. She had to be careful. This man was trouble. The woman's silent plea, her tear-filled eyes, told Kelly everything she needed to know. This wasn't a normal situation. "She's recovering well," Kelly replied, her voice steady but guarded. She forced herself to meet the man's eyes, not showing the tension she felt tightening in her own chest. "We're keeping an eye on her progress. She should be up and about in a few hours." The man nodded curtly, his gaze not leaving the woman. Kelly could feel the air in the room grow thicker, like something was about to snap. The woman's eyes darted back and forth, a flicker of panic crossing her face, before she quickly lowered her gaze, focusing on the blanket in her lap. Kelly noticed how tightly the woman's hands gripped it, her knuckles white. Whatever was going on here, the woman was trying to hold it together, trying to stay calm in the face of something terrifying. Kelly's mind raced. She needed to keep the man distracted, find a way to figure out what was really going on without alarming him. The woman's bruises, the phone number, the terror in her eyes, it all pointed to something dark. This man was part of the puzzle, but Kelly couldn't put the pieces together just yet. "Is there anything I can get for you?" Kelly asked the man, forcing a smile. "Water? A snack?" "No," he said shortly, glancing over at Kelly for a brief moment. There was a coldness in his eyes that sent a shiver down Kelly's spine. "I'll stay here for a while." Kelly nodded, not wanting to provoke him further. She turned her attention back to the woman, but the sense of urgency was now unbearable. She needed to know more. As Kelly checked the woman's vitals, the man stood silently by the window, arms crossed, his expression unreadable. The woman seemed to shrink even further under his watchful gaze, her body language screaming fear. Kelly could feel the tension building, thickening in the air like a storm waiting to break. "Is there anyone I can call for you?" Kelly asked the woman softly, her voice barely above a whisper. She didn't want to make the man suspicious, but she also couldn't let the woman go on in silence. The woman's eyes flicked to the man for a second before she quickly looked away. She opened her mouth as if to speak, but then closed it, shaking her head gently. Kelly could see the fear in her eyes, and it made her heart ache. The woman was clearly trapped, unable to ask for help without risking the safety of herself and her child. The man's gaze shifted back to the bed, his eyes narrowing, as if he could sense the undercurrent of tension in the room. Kelly felt her stomach tighten. She had to do something. Her mind raced through all the options. Could she call 911 and get help here in time? Or was the danger so immediate that even a phone call might make things worse? A few minutes passed in tense silence, the only sound the faint beeping of the machines and the occasional shuffle of feet in the hallway outside. Kelly took another step toward the door, making a note in her chart as a way to distract the man, to keep him occupied. But just as she reached for the door, the woman spoke again, her voice barely audible. "Please," her voice trembled, and Kelly had to lean in close to hear her. "Don't call anyone. Please, he'll hurt me. He'll hurt my baby." Kelly's breath caught in her throat. The words hit her like a punch to the gut. She could feel her body tense, every instinct screaming at her to call for help. But the woman's desperate plea, the terror in her voice, made Kelly pause. She had to find a way to help, but the situation was more dangerous than she'd imagined. This wasn't just about the woman's injuries. It was about something deeper, something more sinister. The man's voice interrupted her thoughts. "Is everything okay in here?" he asked, his tone sharp and watchful. Kelly forced herself to smile again, nodding quickly. "Yes, everything's fine. Just checking her vitals." The man didn't seem convinced, but he didn't press. He turned away from Kelly, his attention back on the woman. Kelly could feel the oppressive weight of his gaze, the way he was watching her every move. He was used to being in control, to dominating the space around him. And Kelly knew that if she made one wrong move, this could escalate in a way she wouldn't be able to control. The room felt smaller, tighter. Kelly had to think fast. Every minute that passed made the danger feel more real, more immediate. She had to figure out how to get the woman out of this situation, but she couldn't do it alone. Kelly's thoughts raced. The woman had given her a clue. She had hidden a number under the pillow. Maybe it was a lifeline, a connection to someone who could help her. But Kelly didn't know who it belonged to or what it meant. The woman had begged her not to call, but Kelly had seen enough to know that the woman was scared, scared for her life, scared for her child. There had to be something she could do. Kelly glanced at the phone again, weighing the options. She couldn't stand by and do nothing. This was beyond just nursing care. This was about saving someone's life. But how could she do that without making things worse for the woman, for the baby? Just then, the man spoke again, his voice low and almost soothing, though Kelly could sense the edge of control in his tone. "I'm going to stay here for a while," he said. "She needs rest." Kelly nodded, but she didn't trust him. Every fiber of her being told her that this man was dangerous, that whatever was happening here was much worse than it seemed. But the question was, how could she get the woman out of danger without alerting him to her intentions? The silence stretched on, heavy and suffocating. Kelly's mind spun as she tried to come up with a plan. She had to act, but she couldn't afford to make a mistake. And just as she turned back to the woman to check her vitals again, the phone rang. It wasn't her phone. It was the woman's. The ringing filled the room, sharp and sudden, breaking the tension in an instant. The woman's eyes widened, and she froze. Her hand instinctively reached for the phone, but she quickly pulled back, as if afraid to answer it. Kelly's heart raced. This was it, the moment that could change everything. The phone continued to ring, and the man glanced at it with a raised eyebrow. He didn't move to answer it, but Kelly could feel the weight of the moment hanging in the air. The phone rang again, its shrill sound cutting through the heavy silence like a warning bell. Kelly's eyes flicked to the woman, whose entire body had gone rigid, her hands trembling as she hovered just inches from the phone. Kelly could see the woman's lips part slightly, as if she was about to speak, but then she quickly pressed them together, her breath coming in shallow gasps. The man hadn't moved, but Kelly noticed the way his jaw clenched. He was aware of the phone, aware of the tension that had filled the room. He didn't take his eyes off the woman, his gaze locked on her with an intensity that made Kelly's skin crawl. His hand was still clenched at his side, fingers white from the pressure, and the air between them seemed to crackle with a dangerous energy. The phone rang again, and this time, the woman flinched. Kelly saw it clearly, the way her body recoiled as though the sound was a threat she couldn't escape. The woman was scared, scared to answer, scared to let anyone know what was going on behind the scenes. Kelly's heart ached for her, but she knew this was a pivotal moment. If the woman didn't answer, there might be no way to reach out for help. If she did answer, there was a chance the man would react violently. "What are you waiting for?" The man's voice broke through, cold and almost mocking. "Answer it." His tone wasn't one of concern, it was an order. Kelly could see the tightening of the woman's shoulders, the way her eyes shifted nervously between the phone and the man. She wasn't ready to pick up, but Kelly knew that silence could be just as dangerous. If she didn't act now, things could spiral out of control quickly. The woman's hand hovered near the phone again, her fingers trembling. Kelly felt the pit of her stomach drop. She had to make a decision. Now. There was no room for hesitation. Every second that passed, the situation became more dangerous. If she didn't step in, there was a real chance that something awful would happen. She wasn't going to let that happen. She cleared her throat softly, as if trying to give the woman a moment of courage, a moment to break through the paralyzing fear. "It's okay," Kelly said gently, her voice low but steady. "You don't have to answer if you don't want to. I'm here." The woman glanced at Kelly, her eyes filled with unspeakable fear. The phone continued to ring, and in that moment, Kelly felt like time had slowed down. She could hear the distant beeping of the machines, the soft murmur of voices from the hallway, and all of it seemed to fade into the background. All that mattered was the phone, the woman's fear, and the man standing in the corner, waiting for a response. The woman's hand shook as she reached out for the phone, and Kelly could feel the weight of the decision hanging in the air. With a deep breath, the woman picked it up, her fingers brushing the screen with a tremor. Kelly's heart raced as she watched her. "Hello," the woman whispered into the phone, her voice barely audible. Kelly could see the man's eyes narrow, his entire body tense, as he took a step toward the bed. The woman's voice cracked as she spoke, her words trembling like fragile glass. It was as if she was walking a tightrope, knowing that any wrong move could bring everything crashing down. "Who is it?" the man demanded, his voice sharp, his eyes boring into the woman's. The woman didn't answer. Instead, she just stared at the phone, her face pale, her eyes wide with fear. Kelly's stomach churned as she watched the woman struggle, torn between her fear of the man and the desperate need to reach out for help. But the woman wasn't going to say anything. Not yet. Not while he was standing there, his presence suffocating everything in the room. Kelly stepped forward, making her move just as the man started to take another step toward the woman. "It's okay," she said, her voice calm but firm. "She's just getting some rest. We'll let her have some privacy." The man looked at Kelly with a cold expression, his eyes assessing her. It wasn't the kind of look that made Kelly feel safe. It was the kind of look that made her feel exposed, as though he could see right through her. His gaze flicked briefly to the woman, and for a moment, Kelly thought she saw something change in his eyes. A flicker of doubt, maybe, but it was gone in an instant. He took a step back, and the air felt like it had cleared, just a little. But Kelly knew better than to think this was over. It wasn't. The woman put the phone down slowly, her hands trembling even more now that the ringing had stopped. She didn't say anything, didn't meet Kelly's gaze. She just lay there, her chest rising and falling in quick, shallow breaths. The silence in the room was deafening, and Kelly could feel the weight of it pressing down on her. Minutes passed, but it felt like hours. Kelly could feel the tension building again, this time in her own chest. The man hadn't moved. He was still standing by the window, his arms crossed, his gaze flicking between the woman and Kelly. Kelly knew he was watching them closely, waiting for something, waiting for a sign, a slip-up. The woman's eyes were wide, her face pale, as if she was trying to retreat into herself. Kelly noticed the way she kept glancing toward the door, as though hoping someone might walk in and break the spell, someone who could help her escape this nightmare. But no one came. No one would. Kelly knew it was up to her now. She tried to keep her voice steady as she spoke again, breaking the silence. "You're safe," Kelly said softly, though she wasn't sure if it was true. She wasn't sure of anything right now, except that something needed to be done, and fast. "You're not alone." The man's eyes flashed, and for a moment, Kelly thought she saw something dangerous there, something far more menacing than she'd seen before. He took a step closer to the bed, his movements deliberate, slow. "You need to leave her alone," Kelly said, her voice more forceful now. "She's been through a lot. She needs rest." The man's gaze flicked to her, then back to the woman. The air between them grew colder, heavier, as if the room itself was holding its breath. Kelly stood her ground, but inside, she felt like she was walking a tightrope. One wrong move, and everything could explode. Then, without warning, the woman turned her head sharply, her eyes wide with terror. "Please," she whispered, her voice cracking. "Don't hurt me." Kelly's heart clenched, and she could feel the room closing in around her. This wasn't just a mother recovering from childbirth. This was a life on the edge, a woman trying to escape a nightmare she couldn't outrun. The man's expression darkened. "You should have kept your mouth shut," he growled, and Kelly could feel the tension in the air snap like a wire about to break. Everything in the room shifted in that moment. The quiet, the stillness, it was all about to change. The phone call, the fear, the bruises, they were all pieces of a puzzle that Kelly had only just begun to understand. But now, she was about to see it all unfold in a way that would change everything. The man's words echoed in the room, heavy with menace. Kelly's stomach twisted as she stood frozen in place, her heart pounding in her chest. The woman's wide, terrified eyes didn't leave the man's face, and for a moment, everything seemed to hold still. But then the woman's breath hitched, her hand reaching for the blanket, as if it might provide some semblance of safety. The air had thickened with tension, the kind of tension that felt like it could snap at any moment. "Please, don't hurt me," the woman whispered again, the words barely audible, but filled with such deep desperation that Kelly's hands clenched into fists. She wanted to reach out, to tell the woman that it would be okay, that she was here to help. But the truth was, Kelly wasn't sure it would be okay. Not yet. The man stepped forward, his shadow falling over the woman. His expression had shifted. Gone was the cold detachment, replaced by something far darker. He was a predator, a person who thrived on control, on power. And right now, the woman was his prey. "I've told you before," he said, his voice low and menacing. "You don't get to make the rules here." The woman flinched, shrinking back, as though she could make herself disappear into the bed. Kelly could feel the fear radiating off her, thick and palpable. The silence was suffocating, but Kelly couldn't move. She couldn't let this man know how scared she was, how terrified she felt for both of them. Her mind raced for a way out, a way to stop this before things escalated any further. Then, just as quickly as it had come, the man's expression changed again. His shoulders relaxed slightly, and he let out a deep sigh. "Fine," he muttered, shaking his head as if he were disappointed. "But don't think this is over." He turned on his heel and walked toward the door, his footsteps deliberate, each one heavier than the last. Kelly's pulse raced, and for a fleeting moment, she thought he was leaving, that the danger had passed. But as he reached the door, he paused, his hand resting on the handle. The room went silent again, and Kelly held her breath. "You won't get away with this," he said quietly, his voice carrying a cold threat. "Don't forget who's in charge." The door swung open, and he stepped out into the hallway, leaving Kelly and the woman alone. The moment he was gone, Kelly exhaled shakily, her body going slack with relief. But the relief was fleeting. It wasn't over, not by a long shot. Kelly moved quickly to the woman's side, her hands gently resting on her arm. The woman looked up at her, her eyes filled with gratitude, but also with the same deep fear that had never quite left her. Kelly could see the toll this had taken on her, physically, emotionally. Her face was pale, her eyes hollow with exhaustion, but the bruises still lingered, dark and raw against her skin. "Are you okay?" Kelly asked softly, her voice trembling. She had to know. She couldn't walk away without knowing if the woman was truly safe. The woman opened her mouth, but her voice faltered. I don't know how much longer I can stay," she whispered, her voice barely audible. "He won't stop." Kelly's chest tightened as she tried to process the weight of the woman's words. This wasn't just about physical injuries. This was something far worse. This was control, manipulation, a toxic force that threatened not just the woman, but everything she held dear. "Do you have anywhere to go?" Kelly asked, her voice gentle, but firm. "Anyone you can call?" The woman shook her head slowly, her eyes darting to the door, as though she expected him to walk back in at any moment. "He has people," she said quietly. "People who are always watching." Kelly's heart sank. The fear in the woman's voice, the way she looked over her shoulder constantly, it wasn't just paranoia. This was real. This man wasn't just some abusive partner. He was someone with power, influence, and control over the woman's every move. She was trapped, caught in a web she couldn't escape on her own. "Okay," Kelly said, her voice resolute. "We're going to figure this out. I'll help you, but we need to be careful." She reached for her phone, hesitating only for a second before pulling up the emergency contacts. She had to call someone. Someone who could get the authorities involved. Someone who could provide backup. But as her finger hovered over the call button, she froze. What if the man had people watching the hospital, monitoring the phones? What if he had eyes everywhere? Calling 911 might not be enough. It could make things worse. She quickly locked the phone, trying to think of another way. Her mind raced, her thoughts colliding in a chaotic storm of options. She couldn't let this go on. The woman's life was on the line, but so was Kelly's. If the man found out that she was trying to help, there was no telling what he would do. Just as she was about to speak again, the phone buzzed in her hand. The message notification flashed across the screen, and Kelly felt her stomach churn. The message wasn't from anyone she knew, but the words on the screen made her blood run cold. "You're being watched. He knows what you're doing." Kelly's heart dropped into her stomach. She glanced over at the woman, who had seen the message pop up on the screen. Her eyes widened in fear, her lips trembling as she read the words. "Who is it?" the woman asked, her voice shaking. "What does it mean?" Kelly's fingers trembled as she stared at the message, trying to process the meaning. How had they found her? How had they known what she was planning? She didn't have an answer. But the weight of the situation was becoming painfully clear. This wasn't just a case of an abusive relationship. It was something far more calculated, far more dangerous than she had imagined. Kelly's mind raced. If the man had people watching her, if he had somehow infiltrated the hospital, it was only a matter of time before he figured out what was happening. She couldn't risk calling the authorities, at least not in a way that was obvious. She had to be smarter, quicker, and more careful than she'd ever been in her life. As she looked at the woman, the tension between them thickened. They were both caught in a trap, and the walls were closing in. Kelly had never felt so powerless, so uncertain of what to do next. But she knew one thing for sure. If she didn't act soon, everything they were both trying to protect would be lost. The seconds stretched on, each one feeling like a lifetime. Kelly's thoughts were a blur as she weighed her options. She had to get the woman out of here, but how? And who could she trust? Time was running out, and with every passing moment, the danger grew more real. Kelly's mind raced as she stared at the cryptic message on her phone. The realization hit her like a punch to the gut. They were not just dealing with an abusive man. This was a coordinated, systematic threat that extended far beyond anything she had imagined. Her eyes flicked to the woman, whose fear mirrored her own. She was trapped in a web of control, and now Kelly was right there with her. "Who sent this?" the woman asked, her voice trembling, though her eyes showed a flicker of hope. "What do we do?" Kelly didn't have an answer. The message had thrown her off guard, and she could feel the weight of it pressing down on her. She glanced at the door, listening carefully, but there was no sound. No sign of the man returning. But the silence only heightened the tension. She knew he wouldn't stay away for long. "What if they're watching?" the woman whispered, her voice shaking. "What if he's already outside the door?" Kelly took a deep breath, trying to steady herself. She couldn't afford to panic. The only thing that mattered right now was getting the woman out of this place. Kelly had to act. She wasn't going to let the man win, not when she was so close to helping the woman escape. But she had to be careful. Every move had to be calculated. Her phone buzzed again, pulling her from her thoughts. Another message. Her stomach churned as she opened it. This time, it was clearer, more direct. "We see you. Don't think you can protect her." Kelly's heart skipped a beat. It was too late to turn back. She had to get out of there. Now. "Listen to me," Kelly said firmly, her voice filled with urgency. "We don't have much time. We need to leave, but we can't do it the obvious way. I'll find a way out, but you have to trust me." The woman nodded, her eyes wide, her face pale with fear. Kelly didn't waste another moment. She grabbed her phone and sent a quick text to a trusted friend, someone who worked in a nearby precinct. The message was simple but urgent. "I need backup. It's bad. Do not call 911. They're watching." She slipped the phone into her pocket and moved toward the window. The room was on the second floor, but there was a small fire escape ladder just outside. If they were going to get out of here unnoticed, that was their best shot. She turned back to the woman, her face set with determination. "We're going out the window. Stay close to me." The woman looked uncertain, but there was no time to hesitate. She nodded and rose to her feet, her legs unsteady as though she had been lying in bed for far too long. Kelly was there to steady her, her hand gripping the woman's arm tightly. Together, they'd made their way to the window, Kelly cautiously pulling back the curtain. She winced as the light from the hallway filtered in through the small crack in the door. The hallway was empty, but Kelly knew it wouldn't stay that way for long. She pushed the window open, the sound of the hinges making her heart race. The cool night air hit her face as she peered outside. The fire escape was right there, only a few feet away, and it was their only chance. With one final look over her shoulder, Kelly helped the woman climb out of the window. It was awkward and terrifying, but they managed it. The woman was first, her hands trembling as she gripped the metal ladder, her feet scrambling for purchase. Kelly was right behind her, keeping a careful watch on the door. They descended quickly but carefully, each step bringing them closer to freedom. When they reached the bottom, Kelly led the woman toward the alley behind the hospital, where the shadows could offer them a little more cover. She could hear the distant hum of traffic, but they were still far from safe. But as they rounded the corner, Kelly heard something that made her blood run cold. Footsteps. Quick, purposeful footsteps. She froze, her eyes scanning the darkness. Her heart thudded in her chest, and she could see the woman stiffen beside her. "Go," Kelly hissed, grabbing the woman's arm and pulling her into the shadows. They darted between two parked cars, ducking low to avoid being seen. Kelly's mind raced, trying to come up with a plan. But then, the sound of a voice cut through the night. "Looking for someone." Kelly spun around, her breath catching in her throat. A figure emerged from the shadows, a man dressed in dark clothing. His face was obscured by a mask, but there was no mistaking who he was. The same icy demeanor, the same sense of control. The man from the hospital. He hadn't just been watching from a distance, he had followed them. Kelly's pulse quickened, but she didn't back down. "Stay calm," she whispered to the woman, her voice steady despite the panic threatening to rise in her chest. "Stay quiet. I've got this." The man took a step forward, his eyes flicking between Kelly and the woman. "You thought you could escape," he said, his voice cold. "You really don't know who you're dealing with." Kelly's breath caught in her throat, but she forced herself to focus. She wasn't going to let him take the woman back. Not now, not ever. "Stay back," Kelly said, her voice firm. She wasn't sure where the courage was coming from, but it was there, steady and unwavering. "You don't have control anymore." The man smirked, taking another step forward. But just as Kelly was about to say something else, she heard a car engine revving in the distance. A vehicle pulled into the alley, its headlights cutting through the dark. The man's smirk faltered for a split second as he turned to look, his body tensing. Before he could react, the door to the car swung open, and two uniformed officers emerged, their badges gleaming in the light. "Police, get on the ground." The man froze, his expression shifting from smug confidence to realization. He had been outmaneuvered. One of the officers advanced toward him, gun raised. "I said get down." The man didn't move, his eyes darting from the officers to Kelly and the woman. In that moment, it all happened so quickly. The man lunged, but the officers were faster. A flash of movement, a struggle, and then the man was pinned to the ground. Kelly let out a breath she didn't even realize she had been holding. The woman, still trembling, stepped forward, and Kelly placed a reassuring hand on her shoulder. "Are you okay?" Kelly asked softly, her voice filled with relief. The woman nodded, her face streaked with tears, but there was a flicker of something else in her eyes. Hope. It was the first time since Kelly had met her that she seemed truly free. But just as they started to walk toward the car, another twist hit. Kelly's phone buzzed once again, the message flashing on the screen. "It's not over. You don't know who you've just taken down." The words sent a chill through Kelly, and she turned to the woman, her heart pounding in her chest. Who was really behind this? And what had they just stepped into? The story was far from over. Kelly's hands trembled as she read the message on her phone, her heart pounding in her chest. The words were clear, ominous. "It's not over. You don't know who you've just taken down." She quickly pocketed the phone, trying to steady herself. There was no time for second-guessing, no time to dwell on what the message meant. The officers were securing the man, and the woman, her face streaked with tears, was clinging to Kelly's side as if she were a lifeline. "Are you okay?" Kelly asked softly, her voice filled with concern. She had been through so much in such a short time, and now that they were finally safe, the exhaustion seemed to hit both of them all at once. The woman nodded, though her eyes were still filled with doubt. "I think so, but who was that man? And what do you mean it's not over?" Kelly sighed deeply, trying to piece everything together. She had hoped that once they had him, once the police were involved, the worst of it would be over. But the message, the way it had been worded, the sense of finality that wasn't there, it left her uneasy. "We'll figure it out," Kelly said, forcing a reassuring smile. "But first, let's get you somewhere safe." The woman nodded again, and together they walked toward the car. The officers had everything under control now. They would take the man into custody, and the investigation would unfold from there. But for Kelly, there were still too many unanswered questions. Who had sent that message? How many people were involved in this, and how far did their influence reach? As the car pulled away from the alley, the night air outside seemed almost peaceful compared to the storm of emotions swirling inside her. The woman, whose name Kelly still didn't know, sat quietly beside her, her hands folded tightly in her lap. "Do you want to talk about what happened?" Kelly asked after a while, breaking the silence. "I know it's a lot, but you don't have to go through this alone." The woman glanced at Kelly, her eyes wary but grateful. I don't know if I can, but I'll try." She paused for a long moment before speaking again. "His name was Well, it doesn't matter now. But he wasn't just some man. He's connected. He has people in powerful places, people who are always watching. It's not just about control, it's about power. He gets away with everything because he's untouchable. Kelly's heart sank as she listened. She had suspected as much. There had been a dangerous air about him from the start. But hearing it confirmed made everything seem so much darker. The woman's life had been a carefully controlled existence, and now, even as she stepped into the unknown, she was still caught in that web. "I don't know how long I can keep running," the woman whispered. "I've been running for years. And now, I don't know what to do next." Kelly glanced over, her expression softening. "You don't have to run anymore. You're safe now. We'll get you the help you need." The woman looked at her, her eyes searching Kelly's face for any sign of certainty. "I want to believe you. I really do. But it's hard to imagine a life without him controlling everything." Kelly reached over and gently placed a hand on the woman's arm. "It won't be easy, but we'll figure it out. You deserve to live a life that's yours, free from fear." The car ride stretched on in silence, the weight of the situation settling between them. Kelly couldn't stop thinking about the message on her phone, though. She couldn't shake the feeling that there was more to this story than what she'd seen so far. She had just witnessed a dangerous man's downfall, but someone had made it clear that the battle wasn't over. As they arrived at the safe house, a place that had been set up in advance by Kelly's contacts, the woman hesitated before getting out of the car. Her hand lingered on the door handle, her gaze distant, as if she was bracing herself for something. "You don't have to stay here if you don't want to," Kelly said gently. "I'll stay with you for as long as you need." The woman turned to face her, a small smile tugging at the corners of her mouth. "Thank you. I don't think I've ever had someone believe in me before. It feels strange, but good." Kelly smiled back. "It's the least I can do." They stepped out of the car and into the house, where the familiar surroundings of the safe house felt oddly comforting. Kelly knew this wouldn't be the end of the road, not by a long shot. There would be paperwork, investigations, and possibly even threats. The man they had taken down wasn't the only one who had power, and his connections ran deep. But for the first time in what seemed like forever, the woman seemed to breathe a little easier. As the hours passed, Kelly remained by her side, offering a steady presence. They talked, they planned, and slowly the woman began to open up. Her story was heart-wrenching, filled with years of fear and manipulation. But she was strong, and with Kelly's help, she would find a way to rebuild her life. The next morning, as the sunlight streamed through the window, Kelly's phone buzzed again. She picked it up, her fingers hovering over the screen as she read the message. It was from her contact in the police department. The message was short, direct. "We got him. But there's more to this. You were right to be careful. The investigation is far from over." Kelly's stomach tightened as she processed the words. They had caught the man, but the battle was only just beginning. He wasn't the mastermind. He was a piece of a much larger puzzle, one that stretched into the deepest, darkest corners of power and influence. But for now, as she looked over at the woman, who was finally starting to feel a sense of peace, Kelly knew they had won this small victory. It was a victory that meant something. It meant that even in the face of overwhelming odds, people could fight back. People could survive. And sometimes, just sometimes, justice could be done. The road ahead was uncertain, but Kelly was ready for whatever came next. They would face it together. The truth was, they had already come too far to back down now.